Hey everyone. So recently I started looking at trading items on the Path of Exile 2 trade website that I have on my screen now. One of the things I noticed is that I've consistently been undervaluing the items, especially the white items that I was selling on Path of Exile 2 trade, which made me take another look at it and the items that I typically run into and try to sell on Path of Exile 2 trade to understand the value. I sort of create an overview on what the average value of those items are and you know how I can better value my items and sell them for a better price. Because first of all, you know, selling your stuff on Path of Exile to trade, having to go to this external website and then having to deal with partying with a person in game and then doing the exchange is obviously pretty painful. You know, I personally only want to do that for items that are really worth it or that I really need, and obviously want to do that for the right price and the right amount. That's basically setting the stage for this video. Let me know what you think. If you have a completely different view of what I'm gonna tell you about the specific items that I looked at, I'm obviously very curious to hear from you. The other thing is that this is obviously what you see in the financial markets as well, is that trading is obviously very time sensitive and time specific. So what I'm telling you now next week or even in 2 or 3 days can be completely different, right? So this is a sort of a timestamp. So that's obviously important to know with this video. So let's get started. So first off, I looked at white items, uncorrupted, that are, according to the Path of Exile 2 trade website, are in high demand. That's basically the target. And again, the reason why I found out is that I've been messing around with certain amulets, which I later found out are highly valuable. And I basically messed them up and then disenchanted them. So obviously I will not do that again. And I basically want to help anybody online that plays this game to prevent them from making the same mistake as I did. So I think that's setting the stage. Let's jump in. So I basically use the official Path of Exile 2 trade website that's obviously aligned to the game. I basically set up a sheet and looked at a number of specific items that I think are worth your while. Basically meaning that if you find them in normal rarity, so that's the white items, you should keep them. Don't leave them on the floor. Don't throw them away. Don't convert them to magic or rare, because you basically take away the value. So long story short, I think a lot of these items, I don't know it for all, but a lot of these items are basically being used to convert to specific items that people are looking for. That being a utility belt, that being a specific ring, a specific amulet, a specific wand. It's those kind of reasons people take these. The other thing is that I basically looked at sample sizes. Obviously this is all manual, so there's obviously some error margin that we need to take in account here. I basically took a sample size of 50 and looked at the average price in exalted orbs, the maximum price in exalted orbs, the minimum price in exalted orbs, and then the same for divines. So that's basically how I looked at it. The first item is the sapphire ring. This is one of those items that when I was cleaning my inventory literally a week ago, I got rid of a whole bunch of these, and these things go for significant amounts of exalteds and significant amounts of divines. So keep those rings. So what it means from an exalted perspective, the average on a sample size of 50 offers, the average that the sapphire ring goes for is 106. There's obviously a number of outliers. So there's a number of people that put a sapphire ring up for an excessive amount of exalted orbs, right? You see 300 and 300 is actually the highest, but it's not unique, right? So on a sample size of 50, there's 3 people that put it up for 300. There's about 4 people that put it up for 250. There's a larger group of people that put it up for 160, 150, right? So on the low end, you have people that put it up for 20 exalted orbs, right? So that's really the lowest of the lowest. And that's just one. So the trend of extraordinary high is much more trending than extraordinary low. So I think if you go in a range of between 50 and 70 exalted orbs, I think you're in a fairly good spot. Anything cheaper, I think you should be able to sell your sapphire rings fairly quickly. When we look at the divine orbs side, we basically see an average of 3.8. When I look at this, I would probably put my sapphire ring up for somewhere around 2 or 3 divines. If you want to get rid of them really quick, put it up for 1. As you can see, the supply of people that put it up for 1 in the sample size of 50 is quite a lot. So there is quite a lot to choose from, right? So you're probably quicker if you want to put them up for 1 divine. That's it for the sapphire ring. Next up is the gold ring. I think going back to the sapphire ring for 1 second, if you look at the supply, I think the sapphire ring, the numbers that hit Path of Exile 2 trade is significant. So there's quite a high number of people putting sapphire rings up for sale. If you look at the gold ring, people putting up gold rings on Path of Exile 2 trade is significantly lower than the sapphire ring. I think they're also cheaper. When you look at the exalted orbs, they basically the average price for a gold ring is 23.5 exalted orbs, with the highest offer being 250, which is obviously quite exceptional, and the lowest one being 1. Looking at the divines, as you can see, the average for a gold ring is around 1. So that's, I think, a pretty good price for a gold ring. The highest price put on is 4 divine orbs. The lowest one is 1. So let's have a look at the sample size to understand how that looks. So as you can see from an exalted orb perspective, there is only 2 or 3, if you count 100 exalted orbs, outliers that are really outside of the range. Right? I think those are more exceptional than common. There's obviously a couple of offers of 50, 40, but those are not the trends, right? You see quite a lot of green, quite a lot of 10s actually. So if you want to go exalted and sell your gold ring for an exalted orb, you're probably safe going somewhere between 10 and 20. Again, if you want to sell quickly, you can obviously go lower and see if you're lucky and sell either your ring or your rings quickly. I think if you put your gold ring up for a divine, you want to put it up for 1 divine. Anything higher, you're clearly in the minority and you probably get skipped. Right? Seeing the supply of gold rings for 1 divine orb is significant. You know, that's probably where you want to be. Okay, that's it for the gold ring. Let's jump to the next one. So next up is the breach ring. The amount of offers made on Path of Exile 2 trade for the breach ring is significant. So I consider the supply on PoE 2 trade to be high. Looking at paying for a breach ring with exalted orbs, they go on average for 57 exalted orbs, with the maximum offer being made for 200 and the minimum being made for 1. Looking at the divine orb offering, the average is about 2.7, so I would round it down to probably 2, with the highest offer being put up for 31 divine orbs and the lowest one being put up for 1. So let's have a look at the sample size. Starting with the exalted again, like with the gold ring, I think what you see in this sample size is that there's obviously a couple of outliers on the high end. We have one for 200, which is actually the highest one, and then we have a couple of 100 and a couple of 80, but those are, you can call them a minority. So I think what you see here, there's quite a lot of people putting this ring up for 50, which is probably still a bit on the high side. I think the average, well, actually it's around the average, right? So I think if you have a normal breach ring and you put it up for somewhere between 30 and 50, you have a good chance of selling it quite quickly. If you have time, put it up for 50, because that's basically just below the average. I think the divine pricing is very stable. Basically what you're seeing is that the majority of people put their breach rings up for 1 divine. There's obviously a couple of outliers. We have one of 20. We actually have one of 31. There's always people trying it, I guess. If you want to put it up for a divine, put it up for 1. And otherwise, switch to exalted orbs. Okay, that's it for breach rings. Let's jump to the next one. Stellar amulets. The stellar amulets and the sapphire ring were the 2 items that I was basically crafting with or gambling with, and not in the right way. So these are the 2 items that I basically had a couple of, and I just trashed them and disenchanted them and ruined them, basically, when I could have earned quite a bit of currency on them. So that's the lesson learned for me. Obviously hoping that I can help you prevent that from happening to you. So looking at the stellar amulet. The stellar amulet supply on PoE 2 trade is medium high. They are going for quite high numbers though. So let's have a look at that. When we look at the exalted orbs, as you can see, they basically go for an average of 467 exalted orbs. As you can see, that's significantly on the high side. So with the max number being 800, the minimum number being 280, that's really significant. When we look at the divine orb side of these offers, the average is 7, with the maximum offer being 100 and the minimum offer being 1. Let's look at the sample size, what it tells us. Let's look at the exalted orbs first. So as you can see, there's a couple of outliers, which we have seen in the last couple of examples as well. So there is one obviously of 800, which is also our maximum number that's being offered. Then there is a couple of 600, a couple of 500, but these are still very high numbers, right? Considering the lowest one being 280 is actually quite an outlier as well on the low side, which is interesting, right? So if you go 400 exalted orbs for a stellar amulet, amulet, you're considered cheap. So imagine that, right? So that's something to keep in mind. I think if you put these up for, and you're looking for exalted orbs, somewhere between 400 and 450 seems like a good price. Looking at divines, it's interesting as well, right? What you see here is they are put up for 1, obviously being the lowest number, but it's not as consistent across the sample size as it was with the rings. There is quite a lot of people putting them up for higher, 2, 5 are numbers that we see a lot, right? I think the average is a bit manipulated by the fact that there is 2 offers for 100 that you see here that obviously, you know, on a total defines of 350, 2 times 100 is obviously significant, right? I think the average of 7 is probably on the high side. So I think for stellar amulets, I think it's more fair to be, honestly, to be between 1 and 2. If you have time, you can put them up for 5 and see if that helps, if that works. But I think a stellar amulet, if you are looking for divines, you're probably looking at 1 or 2. The supply of stellar amulets is considered medium to high. Okay, that's for stellar amulets. Let's look at the next one. One of the things I ran into and sold quite a lot of already are heavy belts. The interesting thing is that I probably have been underselling these for as long as I'm playing the game. I typically put these up, I used to put these up for regals. I think I started putting these up for 2 regals a belt, to the point that I started selling them for like 5, realizing that these things go for, you know, anywhere between 1 and 40 exalted orbs, right? The average they go for is roughly 32 exalted orbs. If we look at the divine side of offerings for heavy belts, it's interesting. They go for just below 4, with on the max side having 70 and on the low side having 1. So we're going to look at the sample size. This is actually one of the examples that I think the sample size is not representative for the average. And you see it on the exalted side. There was actually one person that had an enormous amount of heavy belts for 50 exalted orbs. So what it basically means is that you influence the market, because you put an enormous amount of supply on at a certain price. So you drive the average price up. This is what you see. This is a common market effect. Looking at the rest of the samples, they're significantly lower, right? They're still around 20, 25-ish, with a couple of minor outliers going to 1 or 3. And I actually have a couple of heavy belts in my trade stash. I'm probably going to put these up for, I'm probably going to try like 15 or 20 exalted orbs. That's probably my go-to, and see, I'll see how it works. But this is one that next time I run this, I'm obviously curious to see what happens, because I will obviously not have to deal with a person that is selling more than 25 heavy belts for 40 exalted orbs. I think on the divine side, you see the same thing as we saw earlier. The majority of people are trying to sell their heavy belts for 1 divine, but the average number is being influenced by a very small group of people putting their belt up for a very high price. What I would do, honestly, if I would try to get a divine out of a heavy belt, I would put it up for 1. Heavy belts are in high supply. Okay, so that's it for heavy belts. Let's look at the next one. The next one is attuned wands. I've basically been selling my attuned wands, and actually my siphoning wands as well, which we'll do next, for way too low. Again, I was selling these for regals up to a point that I was selling them for so low amount that I was selling them so fast that it was just crazy. I was having people over and they basically said, do you have other ones? And I was selling full stacks, 5, 10, 15 at a time. That clearly should have let the alarm bells go off, but you know, it is what it is. Looking at attuned wands, let's look at the exalted side of things. So the supply is fairly, I'll call it medium compared to some of the jewels we just discussed. The average they go for is around 80 exalted orbs, with on the high side being an extraordinary high amount of 600 exalted orbs, and on the low side having an offer up for 1 exalted orb. Looking at the divine orb side of things, they go on average for 6, which I think again is fairly high, with a max offering of 70 divines and a minimum offering of 1 divine. Looking at the sample size, interestingly, I think if we look at the exalted ones, there's a couple of offerings of 600 exalted orbs for a normal attuned wand, which obviously is you know, excessive, and that obviously drives up the average, because that basically accounts for more than 50%. I think it accounts for 60% of the total amount of orbs that comes into a sample size of 50 offerings, right? That influences the average, which is clearly, 80 is clearly too high. Probably the area where you want to go into, where you put an attuned wand up for trade, is somewhere between 20 and 25 exalted orbs. If you don't have a lot of time, you can obviously go lower and you should be able to sell them quicker. I think if you go the divine route, there's obviously again a person influencing the average price. I think you're probably looking at, if you put this up for divines and you want to be successful, you're probably looking at 1, maybe 2 divines, you can obviously try it. Quite a lot of offerings being put up. Okay, that's it for the attuned ones. Next up is the siphoning ones. So siphoning ones it's a bit higher in supply compared to the attuned ones. Looking at the pricing from an exalted orbs perspective, the siphoning one goes for 35 on average, with on the high side you have offerings for 170 and on the low side for 1. From a divine orb perspective, the average is around 5 divine orbs, with on the high side having an offering for 70 and on the low side having an offering for 1. So I think this is very similar, especially on the divine side, this is very similar as the attuned one. So let's have a look at the sample size. Starting with the exalted orbs, I think it's fairly similar as what we just saw in the attuned ones. So you have a couple of outliers, one of 170, a couple of 100, 90, 60, which are obviously significantly on the high end. I think when we probably look at something between 15 and 25, 25 already being slightly on the high side, but between 15 and 25 exalted orbs for a siphoning ones, you're probably in a good range. From a divine orb perspective, very similar as what we just saw in the attuned ones. There's a couple of offerings that are outliers from a high perspective. Actually, there's exactly the same price as we just saw in the attuned ones, which is 70 divines, which is obviously excessive and is obviously influencing the average price of divine orbs for, siphoning ones. That obviously influences the average. As you can see, the majority of people putting their siphoning ones up for sale put it up for 1. That's probably the range you want to go with. If you're not in a rush and you want to see if it happens, you can put it up for 2 and you can try. But, as you can see, the majority of folks put it up for 1. Okay. That's it from a market view on some of the regular items that go for quite a lot of currency. I'm curious to hear what you think. I'm curious to hear if you think I missed any items. Obviously happy to take items in consideration next time I run this. And all in all, curious to hear what you think. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one. I stream Path of Exile 2 on a daily basis. So by all means, come drop by in the stream to chat about the market of PoE 2 and what you think about my market research, and if you think I'm making a big mess out of it. Obviously curious to hear that, and for the rest, thank you for watching and see you in the next one. Bye.